go. Okay, what we're going to do is, I have some notes here that they gave me. So we'll start off by talking about when you moved down here, or your earliest remembrances of Wilton Manors.
Well, first of all, I think it's just so nice of you all to be interested. We moved to Wilton Manors in 1950. We had lived in Fort Lauderdale for several months. And before that, I lived in Miami. I'm a fifth-generation Floridian. And, lived through the 26th hurricane and all of those interesting things. And then when we moved to Fort Lauderdale, because my husband was transferred here on his job, we built this house and moved into it before it was finished. And there was not a whole lot in this area when we first moved here. The 3 log cabins were at the end of my street, and a lot of people think that those were built in the 30s. They were not. They were built probably in the 49, maybe 49 or 50, because they were brand new when we moved here, had never been lived in.
Okay.
Oh, and in fact, can I just interject a story anytime I think of one?
Absolutely.
There was a woman in this area. She didn't live in Wilton Manors, but they called her Catfish Annie. And Catfish Annie lived in a cardboard box that had housed a piano. She lived someplace on Sunrise Boulevard, but I'm not just sure where. But she would walk down here to Manor Market, which was our little open front local grocery store, and Mr. Brady, who owned the store, would say to the butcher, now when she comes in, every time she comes in, give her a chicken. Well, of course, they got their chickens in those days in a great big box, and there would be various sizes, And so the butcher always gave her the little puny one. And one day she walked up to Mr. Brady and she said, Mr. Brady, I don't appreciate this. She said, every time I come in here, they give me the puny chicken. So he laughed and went back and said, don't give her the puny chicken anymore. I thought, that was poor old Catfish Annie.
And you'll have to forgive me if I don't laugh, because we're recording for a video, so it's going to be overlaid on other things, but it's a very cute story. Can you share any thoughts you would have on what kind of man Dave Turner was?
He was a sensation. Dave Turner is why we bought this lot. He had it on sale. It was for sale for $1,500. And my husband worked for Eli Witt Cigar and Tobacco Company downtown. And Turner had a feed and grain store just maybe a block or 2 from my husband's office. And so we bought this lot. Incidentally, the reason we bought this lot was because in 1947, I think, they had a terrible flood in Fort Lauderdale. And Burdines was brand new, had never been occupied yet. And the water came into the store and ruined the elevator and the escalator and all of the carpeting on the ground floor. So they took all this stuff out and laid it out in the side. My husband could look out his office window and see all this mess out there drying up. So we drove out here to see how dry Wilton Manors was. And not only was most of Wilton Manors dry, but this particular lot was bone dry. We're just on a very slight incline here. So we bought this lot because it was bone dry during the flood. And Mr. Turner had his feed and grain place there. And I would go in, I guess every week. I don't remember whether it was every week or every 2 weeks. I'd go in and make a payment on our lot. And our son was brand new then. He was, less than a year old. And one day Mr. Turner said, are you all going to live there? And I said, yes, we are. And he said, well, good. He said, this will be your next month will be your last payment. I said, no, I still have 500 more to go. And he said, oh, no, you don't. He said, if you're going to move out there, you can have it now. So as soon as we got the lot paid for, we came out here and started to build. And that was the kind of fellow Dave Turner was.
And did your husband build a good portion of the house?
Oh, he built most of it, and in spite of the fact that he was a polio victim, he had polio when he was 3 years old, and he walked with a severe limp, but was as strong as an ox. He did office work. He was a bookkeeper and an accountant, but he was up on this roof, putting the roof on, and built a lot of the house.
Now, tell us about the land where the elementary school now sits.
It was vacant, and Dave Turner had given that. Now let me see. Was it Dave Turner? Yeah, Dave Turner gave that to the county for a school, and that was another reason we built here, because we knew the school would be so close. And they didn't build the school, and we waited and we waited, and my neighbors who lived across the street would take their little second grader and walk down to 26th Street, where all the mailboxes were lined up in a row, and we would stand there and wait for the bus to come pick up this little second grader. And I thought, that's just not fair. We have so many children here. We've got the property, and the school board's not building a school. So I started taking my son to the school board meetings. And little boys don't sit very quietly in meetings. And at first I used to do everything to appease him and keep him quiet. And then I thought, I'm not going to do that anymore. So when he wanted to talk out loud, I let him. And when he wanted to rattle popcorn things, I let him. And one day he cried, and I let him do that too. And finally and incidentally, they quit putting me on the agenda. I would call every time they had a meeting, I was on the agenda. And then they quit putting me on, so that I would have to wait till the very last person, and then they said, anybody in the audience who wants to say anything. So they reached the point that they would say, whose child is that? It's mine, Marcia Stafford. And so they would listen to me. Well, finally they started the school. And then across the street from the school, south from the school, there was a house of ill repute. And I guess that during Prohibition they had sold liquor there, or served it. I don't know whether I guess they sold it in bottles and served it, because over on that corner near that house, there was a whole section of the school ground was covered with all these bottles that had been thrown over there into a vacant lot. And my goodness, we couldn't let the school children play there. So Jean French, who still lives in Wilton Manors, and half a dozen other women, used to meet every morning about, just as soon as we got the kids in school, we'd go down there and on our hands and knees dig up all this broken glass, because it kept working its way to the surface. So that's how Wilton Manor School got started. Dave Turner gave the property to the school board.
Tell us about the first mayor of Wilton Manors. I believe it was
Perry Mickle.
Perry Mickle was elected the second mayor because...
All right, then the first mayor was Hagan. What was his first name?
Alvar Hagan.
Alvar. He pronounced his name Alvar. Alvar Hagan. I really barely knew him, because just as we moved out here, he was going out of office and Perry Mickle was coming in.
Okay. And in 51 residents voted for annexation. Well, let's back up. Okay, yeah, 51 residents of Highland Estates was annexed into Wilton Manors. And then...
Well, let's talk about Highland Estates for a minute.
Okay.
When we first moved out here, Highland Estates was a very unusual little section right in there, you know where it is. And people used to come down here in the wintertime and work on a house, and then they would live in it unfinished, and then they would go back north for the summer and come back here every winter, and they'd build a little bit more. And the lots were very strange. They were relatively narrow in the front, but they went back like 300 feet, some of them did. And so there were a lot of sort of undesirable things in there. If you built a house toward the back of the lot. You really couldn't get to it without driving through somebody else's yard, and it was a mess. So when I was on the city council, I don't remember if I was on the city council or if I was city clerk, but anyway, at one time, we decided that we should annex that property. And they agreed to the annexation. They had disagreed before, would never allow it. But they agreed to it if we would allow them to keep their fire department. And we did. And that was where the Wilton Manors Fire Department started, was in Wilton in Highland Estates. And people in the city were just livid because we had annexed that. Why did you want that horrible thing? And we said, it's in the city now. You know, if it belongs to us, we can control a little bit. We can't go back and punish those people who live there now, but, you know, they're grandfathered in. But we can at least control what happens in the future. So it took a long time for people to sort of simmer down and, you know, not bad mouths, but taking the city, that into the city.
And that was 51. And then 52, you were elected as city and court clerk.
Well, now wait a minute. We didn't annex Highland Estates in 51.
Okay.
We annexed it after I was in office.
Okay, then let's move on to the village became a city in 53.
Right, but we had always been incorporated.
Right, as the village.
Now there's some dispute about that too.
Okay.
But I say that just because we changed our name, it doesn't mean we didn't exist before. We were the village of Wilton Manors when I moved here. We were incorporated when I moved here, and then Jim Dean and some other people went up and changed the title to our city and got new papers for us. Changes to the city of Wilton Manors.
Okay, but you were elected city and court clerk from 52 to 60.
Uh-huh.
Okay, tell us about that time.
Well, when we moved here, we didn't have a city hall, and over where the library is now, there was a little building, and it was called the Village Hall. And I don't remember who gave that property to the city. I don't know who gave that to the city. But everybody used to meet there. The Women's Club, the Girl Scouts, Boy Scouts, council meetings were held there. At that time, we had our own little court clerk. Our own little court, Wilton Manor City Court. And the judge and all the business was carried on over there. Forgot what question you asked me.
Okay, that was just
as
city and court clerk.
Okay. Why I happened to run. Dave Turner and some of the others came to me and suggested that I run for city clerk, and I said I know nothing about government. That's not what I've done in the past. I am a doggone good secretary, but I don't know anything about that. And they assured me that I was just exactly what they needed, and that nobody else would be running anyway, and I would have no problem. And don't you know that there were a lot of people who ran, some very highly qualified ones. But I am certain, because of Dave Turner's support and others, that I was elected. And then was elected several times after that to that position.
Tell us about Harry Mickle.
Oh, he was, I love Barry Mickle. He was a farmer and a builder and a developer. He said he built houses and developed property so that he could afford to farm. And he lived over on the other side of Andrews Avenue. And at one time, I think that he had some cows over there, or somebody had some cows, and I think they were his. Because when Tracy was just a baby, I used to put him in his stroller and walk him over to see the cows. He was vitally interested in the city. His wife was an absolute treasure. She was just one of the sweetest people in the world. And they had some tales to tell, too. I'm sorry that they didn't get them on tape before they were deceased.
Okay, the village meeting hall actually was right next door to here. But most of the records were stored in your home, weren't they?
They were all stored here. I mean, everything. We didn't have a police station. We didn't have anything. And in fact, a newspaper man from the Sun-Sentinel came here one time, and he was from England, and I'm not right sure that he understood what was going on in our government. But being a Southerner, I thought, well, I'll be nice to him. So when he walked in, I said, would you like a cup of coffee and a biscuit? And I had purposely made biscuits so that they would be ready for him when he got here. Yes, he would. So I got the biscuits and some honey and a cup of coffee. And the next time the newspaper came out, it said that I stored the city records in my oven. I thought, my goodness, I did not store the city records in my oven. I did store them in my kitchen, however. And many times the city council would stop by here to ask me questions or look up something, or the mayor would come by. And one time I was in the hall supervising my daughter as she took a bath, and my son, who was at that time about 7, had been out playing. We only have one bathroom. So Nancy is in this tub of bubbles, and Tracy rushed in, used the bathroom, flew back out again, and I'm sitting right there in the hall so I could watch her in the bathtub. And all of a sudden she came out of the bathtub with bubbles all over her, little arms in front of her, and she said, well, I am indignant. And of course everybody laughed. They thought that was a funny word for a little girl. And she said, Tracy came into the bathroom while I was taking a bath, and here she stands in front of all of these men, stark stripped nude, you know.
Wow.
So I really didn't have much privacy around here.
Now in 52, well, before we get that, Richard Beanie was the first police chief.
Oh, I love Richard Beanie.
Tell us about
He
it.
was very falsely accused of something. He did not do that.
I'm not aware of that, but tell us about Richard Beanie.
Well, Richard Beanie, I'm not sure how old he was. He had a very military bearing. His uniform was absolutely spotless, and all the creases down the back of the shirt like they were supposed to be, you know, pressed with the seam down the crease down the middle. His shoes sparkled, and he didn't have a tooth in his head. He was, I'm going to say he couldn't have been much more than 50, if he was 50, and a perfectly wonderful police chief. Everybody knew they could depend on him. And one day he was erroneously, and by his wife, charged with molesting one of his children, a little girl. And it was investigated thoroughly, and it was determined that what actually happened was that the child walked into the bathroom while he was in there, and when she saw him, she giggled. And when she came back out, her mother saw her laughing, and you know, I can see that a little girl would think that was funny. But anyway, the city fired him because of that.
In 54, Nancy was born.
Uh-huh.
Give us some history of your daughter.
Well, she was a perfectly normal little girl. She just had her own little close set of friends, you know. Cammie Richardson and Sandra Williams were her closest friends all through her school years. And they spent a lot of time at this house and Nancy at their homes. She played the piano when she was, I'm going to say she might have been 8 when she started taking piano lessons. She was a good student. I don't know what else to tell you about her. She was pure joy to us, of course.
And she went to the University of Florida?
She went to the University of Florida, and she went to summer school a year or two so that she could graduate in 3 years. And then she came home, as she said, expecting to be president of some big corporation because she majored in business and public relations. And when she didn't find a job that she was really looking for, the neighbor, catty-cornered across the street, came over and said that the Junior Chamber of Commerce was having a terrible time. They couldn't find anybody to participate in the Miss Fort Lauderdale pageant. Would she please do it? And she said, oh, no, 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 that's not what I do. However, he asked several times, and she agreed to do it. And in fact was made Miss Fort Lauderdale, and then went up to be Miss Florida, and went to the Miss America pageant, where she did not become Miss America.
And you were talking about her best friend, Cammie Richardson.
Uh-huh.
And did she tell us about the wedding of Cammie? I believe Nancy was bridesmaid.
She was a bridesmaid, but I don't remember the details of that wedding. I'm sorry.
That's okay. I'm just going through the notes that some folks at the Historical Society gave me. Do you remember the Little League baseball field?
When you say the deal, what are you talking about?
This is land that was donated on Power Line Road by Perry Mickle.
Oh, yes, and then they made Mickle Field out of that. Perry Mickle did give that, I think, to the city, and they built that big ball field over there. And at one time, I don't remember if I was on the council or if I was clerk, but the city of Oakland Park used to participate with Wilton Manors and with one or two other small cities, and we would have a baseball game. Well, I am not athletic, and I can't throw a baseball worth anything. But anyway, I had to pitch this ball. And one of the police officers dashed over to a grocery store that was on Andrews Avenue at that time and brought a bushel basket back and gave me this bushel basket to catch the ball in. I thought, well, so much for my career as a baseball player. But a lot of children, in fact, I think one of our present council members played ball over there.
Scott Newton.
Scott Newton.
He's our mayor now.
Mayor.
He was just elected mayor.
Is that machine on?
I can turn it off if you like.
Just for a second.
Okay. Do you remember some of the youth sports events that were held at Hagen Park?
No. Oh, no, wait a minute. I know that one thing that they did over there, they had a teen club, and a woman named Corrine Brandt, I think, formed that club. And I'll tell you, she did a spectacular job. She kept the kids in this city off the street and busy, because they would go over there and they had all sorts of things that they were doing. In fact, they one time had I think they had a Miss Wilton Manors pageant, I believe. Now, I'm not positive of this. But Tracy was the president of the club at that time, and he asked Woody Woodbury to, if he would come be their guest speaker. And I said, Tracy, I don't think Woody Woodbury is the appropriate person to have. Oh yes, he'll be fine. So I called Woodbury, and I explained that these were children. And did he know that? He said, oh yes, I know. He said, I will not do or say one thing to embarrass anybody. And he was simply wonderful.
If you could, tell us about Al and Jenny Hagen.
Well, I knew Virginia very much better than I knew Al. Al was, he was a very retiring sort of person, and just a perfect gentleman at all times. Virginia was one of the most beautiful women you ever want to see, and very active in the women's club, and she had 2 daughters. They had 2 daughters.
Okay. The Food Fair supermarket chain donated land for the new city hall. In July '57, the employees finally moved into the new city hall. What was it like finally being able to move all the records out of your house and into the new building?
Well, now that's not what happened.
Okay.
The city owned that property or bought that property, or Hagen gave it to him. I don't know which, because it's right there by Hagen Park. And anyway, the city built that building first. That was the building that was built, and that's where the fire department was too. And down where now it's been 25 years since I've been out of this house, so I've gotten vague on some things. But as you enter the city hall, down at the left-hand side as you enter it, is where the council meetings are held now, I think.
Yes, ma'am.
And that used to be the fire department. And then all over here were the few city offices we had. There was a city clerk. The mayor and the city clerk were in one office. And I don't remember what was there. But then, and the water department, all that stuff. And then the police department down at the other end, the left end, right end. And we moved there in, what year did we move there?
57.
Yeah, in '57. And it was pretty wonderful to be able to get over there where we could, have everything under one roof. And then the city had so many people attending meetings. We used to have the council meetings inside, just before where the water department and everything was. They'd put up seats, chairs out there, and we'd have the council meeting there. And then we outgrew that, and that's when they moved the police department, the fire department, so that we could have the council meetings in where the fire department was.
And that's pretty much the way it's remained since then.
Pardon?
And that's how it remains now.
Oh, is it?
Yeah. Do you remember in '57 when the first of the original Gateway Towers was torn down to build the A&W Root Beer Drive-In?
No, I don't remember it being torn down. All I remember is that I never thought the tower, and this is a very unpopular view, I never thought the towers were all that spectacular. They were here when we moved here. Frankly, I thought they were an eyesore, and they were totally out of place. I thought what they were put there for is interesting, and the history of it is good. They were put there, of course, so that the developers out here could take people up into that tower, and because there were no roads, and show them the property so that they could say, well, yes, I like this section over here and this one over here. But I've never felt any distress when the towers went.
Okay.
But somebody else has already told you the story, so I won't tell you. But
Well, this is going off of the notes that was provided to me by the Historical Society.
Okay.
And obviously some of it has to be updated.
okay. Now, at one time, a woman called the Bird Lady lived in one of those towers. Have you ever had a record of that?
Just talk with Rick Miller about that.
Okay.
But please tell me.
Well, I don't know very much about it except that she did live up there, and she used to come to the council meetings, and she complained because something about she wasn't having, there was no water up there or something, and there wasn't supposed to be any water up there. She was using the restroom at the police at the service station next door.
So she was basically a squatter.
She was. We called her the Bird Lady. And I have no idea what her name was.
Apparently nobody does. Okay, as the city started to grow, and more businesses and social clubs were founded and religious institutions were established, how did the city change now that there was more places to shop and socialize, and now had a bank as well?
Well, when we first moved here, there were already some things on Wilton Drive. The McJunkins owned everything on the east side of the drive, all those store buildings, and I think Hagen probably owned the ones on the other side of the street. I'm not sure of that. But when we moved here, there was already a children's shop and a dime store, and I don't remember what. And there was an accountant. An accountant had his store there, his office there, and I think there was a real estate office there, and where the Wilton Manors, what do you call it, nursery, the plant nursery, there had been a restaurant of some sort there, and I've forgotten what the name of that was, too. But that building was there for years, and I think was still there when Brian moved his nursery from there. He'll tell you about that.
In '60, Frank Starling was persuaded to step down and become the city's first administrator or manager, which he would do until '81. Can you tell us about Frank Starling? Basically, the one that took over your job.
Yes. That's a little bit of a touchy subject. Fortunately, I am blessed with the ability to forget unpleasant things and things that were unpleasant to me or for me or about me. I do vividly remember that the only time I ever publicly cried at a meeting was the night that, without any warning to me at all, I mean, nobody advised me that it was going to happen. They passed an ordinance, which they handed to me to read, saying that the city clerk would no longer be elected but would be appointed, and that the new city manager the new city clerk would be, and that was a separate ordinance, I think, would be Frank Starling. And it stunned me. It truly did. And bless their hearts, the audience was livid. They were livid. And they all stood up and they really gave me their support. And they weren't there to do that because nobody knew it was going to happen. And anyway, that's all I care to say about that.
But,
and I'm sorry I said that much.
Even with all that, how did it feel to be the first woman elected to public office in Wilton Manors?
I never thought about it as my being a woman. The city of Wilton Manors has been so abundantly kind to me that I always looked at it as this is my way of sort of paying back some of the debt I owed. And the people of the city supported me right up to the last minute, and they were gracious about it and kind, and I have many, many, many friends as a result of my service to the city. And I loved every minute of it. I just can't complain about a thing.
Let's change subject and talk about Kathleen Klein, the first librarian.
Now, there, too, I have a different memory than most people have. My memory of Kathleen, was her name Catherine?
Kathleen is with
Kathleen, okay. My memory of Kathleen Klein is of a woman who had gray hair. I don't know how old she was. I'm going to say she probably was in her 50s. She decided that the city needed a library, and the first library was held in a small, almost like a closet, over at the Covenant Presbyterian Church, long before it was the church that it is now. It was just the little building over there. And they let her use this small area, and she did everything. I mean, she knew she knew how to file books and keep the records, and she did it. And then, when she left there, Brady had a little key shop. They call it something else these days, but anyway, it was not much bigger. Well, it was not any bigger than this tabletop. And he said, we're not making keys out there anymore. You can use this for your library. And so she would stand in the library. Her books were piled around her, or on shelves, and you couldn't go in and shuffle through the books. You went to the window and asked her for a book, and then she would wheel around and get it, push it out the window to you. And she did that for a long time. Never a penny's pay did she get. She just labored long and hard, and she was a very special lady. And I think that they moved to Mexico or someplace, and I know that the reason she was no longer a librarian was because she left town.
Okay, in '66, Bernard Scott, who was 30 years old at the time, became police chief.
Yep.
Tell us about Mr. Scott.
Well, Bud, they called him Bud, and he was young, and he was dedicated, and he was just a fine person. I did not know him personally. Because we were both in office, I got to know him professionally and admired and respected him, but I never knew him socially. He did not live in Wilton Manors. He lived someplace else.
And and Fire Chief John Miller?
Now, everybody loved John Miller. John had a television and, I guess, radio and appliance store someplace. I don't even remember where that was. But he spent hours and hours and hours on the fire department, and really was responsible for the fire department growing like it did.
Do you have any special recollections of Harold Price?
No.
He was mayor and died in '68, and was succeeded by Gerald Thompson.
I was out of office, I think, before he came in.
And so you didn't remember Gerald Thompson either?
Well, I remember Gerald Thompson only because Jerry used to be on the city council with me. And now there are a lot of people who, there's a division about Jerry Thompson too. I personally respected and admired Jerry Thompson. He did a great job for the city. And the one thing that I remember most about him, and I don't even remember what the issue was, but we were on the council together. And I wanted one thing done, and he wanted something else done. And I argued my point and convinced the rest of the council. And Jerry stood up. We were all seated at the council table, and Jerry stood up and walked over and stood behind me and put his hand on my shoulder, and he said, Marcia, you wanted this done. I did not want it done, but I want you to know that I am going to try my level best to see that it works. And immediately he won my total respect. I thought, what a selfless way to look at something. And he really did help whatever that issue was to develop properly.
We have some photographs of you and other elected officials at the dedication of the fire station when it was built. Do you remember that opening?
Not really.
The fire station was a site for some fundraisers and social events, such as a spaghetti dinner. So, can you tell us about those?
Well, let's back up. Can we back up a minute?
Absolutely.
Long before they had those things, the city of Wilton Manors had no city tax. We lived on cigarette tax. And so it was very important that any store that came into the city listed us as Wilton Manors, not Fort Lauderdale, so that we would get the cigarette tax, because that's what paid my salary and repaired the roads and did everything. And I forgot what I was going to tell you. I don't know which group it was, but somebody used to have a big barbecue, and at one time it was on the school grounds at the school after the school was built. At another time it was on Wilton Drive, where Stevens Market was, and where that thrift shop is now. But people used to set up their big barbecue grills, and the men would go out there before daylight and start barbecuing stuff, and ladies would bring, and this is no exaggeration, they would bring wash tubs full, those galvanized wash tubs, full of coleslaw and things like that to these things. And that was another way they earned money. And that might have been the police department, the fire department that was doing that.
And is that what evolved into the spaghetti dinners? Or?
Now, the spaghetti dinners, I thought, were held over at the Kiwanis Club, and I thought the Kiwanis Club did the spaghetti dinners.
That could very well be.
At least that's how I remember that.
Also, you happen to have the distinction of holding public office longer than any other public official in the city's history.
I think you told me that the other day, and I was surprised to hear that. I didn't know that. Probably a good thing I developed arthritis, because that's what made me quit running. I probably would not have given up yet. I might have been defeated, though.
Now, with all your commitment and dedication to the city, you obviously instilled a sense of public service in your son as well. Do you believe that holding elective political office is a worthy goal for people today?
Oh, absolutely. And there's nothing in the world that breaks my heart more than to have somebody say, crooked politicians. Because I knew a lot of politicians very, very well. And I really never knew a crooked politician. I knew some whom I thought used bad judgment, but I don't think that it was a mean bad judgment. I just think that I think that politicians are, to begin with, they are to be commended, because they know very well that they're going to be bad-mouthed the minute they go into office.
Now, tell us a little bit about your son.
Well, our son, of course, he's a joy of my life, was born just before we moved into this house. He went to Covenant Presbyterian Kindergarten and over to Wilton Manors School. His first grade teacher stayed in touch with him until she died. Her name was Susie Meredith, and she is largely responsible for his love of books and learning. He was active in the teen club here in Wilton Manors. He went to the University of Florida and then to the University of Florida Law School.
And then he went to public office.
Yes, the first thing he ran for, I believe, was state representative, and he did not win that one. And this is embarrassing, too. When he did win, one of the seats he won against a Dolphin football player everybody thought was just a shoo-in. So I thought, well, isn't it nice that people recognized Tracy's ability and did not vote for somebody who was just... And that man may have been a wonderful representative, I don't know that. But he had no record for anybody to look at, you know. They would have been voting for him only because of his name.
From its beginning, Wilton Manors, from its beginnings as a village, has been known for the volunteer contributions of its residents on all sorts of causes. Do you think the spirit of volunteerism has made the city stronger and better?
Oh, absolutely. And I know this isn't the sort of thing you're talking about, but years ago, when they used to do the March of Dimes, when you'd walk door to door, I was asked to do Wilton Manors, and I called my friend Jean French, and she and I got together, and we got a captain for each block, you know, and did all of this. Well, I would not have thought to have done this, but Jean wrote everybody a thank you note for helping to do that. Well, needless to say, we never had any trouble getting people to help us the next year, because Jean was just so thoughtful about letting them know that we did appreciate what they did. And one year, Wilton Manors, who was the largest participant in the March of Dimes, per capita, I'm talking about, not.
Right. Okay. And that's pretty much everything we had on. If there's anything else you want to share with the people who are going to see this? Any special memories of the city or anyone in the city in particular?
No, I just remember just so fondly so many things in the city, and it's been a joy to live here. The city is changing dramatically, and that suits me fine too. I think that we're growing and developing, and the values of properties are just totally out of range. I just cannot believe how much houses are going for.